everyone, and welcome to the Curator Talk and Artist Tour of Neighboring Visions, Westchester Artists and Now. So my name is Karintha Lowe, and I'm the Mellon Fellow here at the Hudson River Museum. What that means is that I both teach at Sarah Lawrence College, and I also curate the Community Partnership Gallery, which is where we're all sitting today. And the Community Partnership Gallery is about 1 year old, and this is one of the first exhibitions that we put into the space, and we're really thrilled about it. And one of the goals of the Community Gallery is, as its name suggests, to spotlight the work of artists from the area and to tell stories that are also important to folks in the area as well. And so with that in mind, we often and primarily feature artists from Westchester, the Bronx, New York, and other surrounding communities. And we also, again, sort of explore themes that are meaningful to the communities around us. And another element of this space is that we love to partner with different community organizations. And this exhibition is really kind of modeling that element of what we call the CPG. And so here we partnered with the Bronxville Historical Conservancy, which was a conservancy that was created about 25 years ago, in fact, to conserve the sort of cultural and historical heritage of Bronxville, which is just one town or so over from here. And the Conservancy does a lot of work with historical preservation, and a key component of that is actually collecting and bringing back to Bronxville the work of artists from the sort of turn of the 20th century. And so what a lot of people don't quite know is that Bronxville was once the heart of a thriving arts colony. So in 1890, William Van Lawrence, who you might know of from Sarah Lawrence College, came to the Bronxville area. He moved into a neighborhood called Lawrence Park, and he decided that he was going to create a planned creative community. And this was going to be a community of artists, intellectuals, poets, writers, anyone who he felt was kind of going to bring a particular element of sort of artistry to his area. And he would invite folks in, and they would live in these beautiful large homes that would be open year-round, and they would create art or write throughout the 4 seasons. And so unlike a lot of other artist colonies that we know about, like Gatto, for example, what became known as the Lawrence Park Artist Colony was open year-round. And so it really ended up attracting a lot of landscape artists, which you will see throughout the gallery today. And one thing that I will add about Lawrence Park is that this was not a kind of colony for your struggling artists. Okay, this was a colony for folks who already had a lot of cachet, who had created work that was already quite popular and well known, and who had already kind of built a lifestyle that would kind of fill into this really kind of elite sort of social circle that William Van Lawrence is cultivating around himself. If you kind of wander around Bronxville today, you'll see these huge homes with large extensions around them. A lot of those homes are actually lived in by artists who built their own studios within the artist space. And so in a lot of ways, it was an area that was for kind of well-off, already commercially successful artists. It was also a great opportunity for women to become professional artists because they could create art within the home while also caring for and maintaining that home as well. And so when you look around this space, what we did for this exhibition is we brought together works that the Rochelle Historical Conservancy had collected from Lawrence Park artists, and we selected 7 artists, 8 works, and you can sort of see those around the space. The giveaway for those are that they come in these sort of very large gilded ornate frames that actually really reflect also the kind of gilded kind of excess of that time period in which a lot of these works were created. So a lot of these frames are actually original to the pieces. And again, the artists were active about 1890 to like the mid-20th century. And so I actually worked with a group of Sarah Lawrence College students to curate this exhibition. We selected 8 works from the Bronxville Historical Conservancy, and then I worked with the students to research and find contemporary artists who we could sort of place in conversation with the Historical Conservancy's work. And what really emerged with this was the sense that artists across time have had different influences, different traditions, different mediums, but that they have sort of translated the worlds around them in ways that are both sort of strikingly similar and also quite interesting and different as well. And I'm happy to kind of talk about some of those pairings and comparisons in my work with the students during Q&A, but for the purposes of today, I wanted to focus in on one theme within this gallery, which is something that emerged as the students and I were doing research into the Bronxville Historical Conservancy and also reaching out to artists and hearing about their work, which is the theme of travel and migration. And so you might remember that I said that a lot of the Bronxville artists were quite well off. And what that meant is that they spent a lot of time going abroad and sort of training abroad. And so almost all of the Bronxville artists on view traveled to France during their sort of formative years as artists during the kind of 1860s, 70s, and 80s, and won sort of prestigious fellowships or simply summered in Curator and other locations where they were really encouraged by teachers and by their family members to explore the arts. And so what you'll notice looking around is that a lot of these works really reflect a lot of French artistic movements. So Impressionism, for example, is one that is a movement that sort of began in the 1860s in France, most sort of famously practiced by Monet. And this is where you would capture the qualities of light and really try to capture kind of the impression of space through, again, the use of light and kind of expressive sort of brush strokes as a way to kind of capture the world around you. And so another key component of this is that the artist would always be painting kind of on plein air or outdoors. And so that sort of soft quality of their brushwork and the sort of quickness of their kind of brushwork that you'll notice really reflects again this idea that you are one with the natural world and translating your impressions of it onto the canvas. And so I'll just go over here and talk about one work really quickly. Right by Alvin. So this is a work by Lowe. And Will Lowe was kind of one of the key members of the Lawrence Park colony. He was one of the earliest people to move to Bronxville, and he really was quite well known already in the field, and so he brought a lot of his friends, including one of his students, Charles Lewis Hinton, who's right beside him, to the space, as well as his wife, Mary Fairchild Lowe. It's not in this gallery, but one of her works is on the Rivers Flow Artists Connect right next door if you want to go check it out. But this piece was created in Giverny, which is where Will Lowe summered quite often. He trained and won prestigious scholarships to study in France. Then he returned to the United States, where he became a very well-known and well-respected artist. He would return periodically to France and hang out with his artist friends in their beautiful countryside estates where they would all get together and paint. And so I'd just like to focus on this particular piece. It's called Veiled Sunlight in Giverny, and this is a garden scene that Will Lowe did of his, at that point, not yet wife, Mary Lowe's garden, when she was actually married to a different sculptor. So it's actually a really fun story. And so basically Will kind of visits his artist friends. He goes, he falls in love with a beautiful Mary. 8 years after this painting comes out, Mary and Will get married and move back to Bronxville, where they start their own family. But at this moment in time, Mary is still married to another person, and Will is visiting and sort of enthralled by this world that she has created in this garden. And so one thing that I'll just point out here is that you can again see the emphasis on light and sort of capturing the sort of moment of this kind of sunlit garden, right? He titles it in a way to really emphasize kind of the warmth of the space. But something interesting about this piece as well is that it's a vertical composition, which is kind of somewhat unusual for a landscape work. And I will just have to say that I was talking with one of my Sarah Lawrence students about this piece, and she said that it reminded her of kind of a door, right? And that you could almost open this piece and walk right in. And that that's kind of amplified by the winding pathway, right? That you're almost being invited to walk in this garden. And I will say as well that Will wrote quite a lot of essays about the garden, and so I'll just read one thing that he wrote about this particular garden that I think also might have a little something to do with kind of the importance of married and that relationship for the rest of his life. And he says, in 1902, that the garden filled the days with a beauty so delicate and impalpable that, knowing how soon it would vanish, brought pleasure closely akin to pain. And so that is sort of what is captured in this particular moment in time. And so if you look outside, on the breezeway, there's another work by Will Lowe that has more kind of Grecian elements, and again, I can talk a little bit more about that. But what you'll see kind of again and again throughout these works is that for the Lawrence Park artists, traveling, moving to different places not only shaped their lives, but the art that they created to reflect their lives, right? And that's something that really kind of gathers all of the artists within this exhibition, but particularly the pieces that I selected with Alvin and Francine. And so I'll let them kind of now share a little bit more with you about how kind of similar themes of travel and movement shape the works that they have on view. But before I do that, I will read their very impressive bios so that we will have a sense of who we're hearing from today. So I'll start with Alvin. Alvin Clayton, like his artistry, is an eclectic mix of visual artist, professional fashion model, athlete, and restaurateur. Born in Trinidad and raised both there in Washington, D.C., Alvin attended college on academic and athletic scholarships and modeled professionally. When he landed a photo shoot in Paris, he discovered the French visual artist Henri Matisse, and Alvin was awestruck as the use of colors reminded him of his Trinidadian home. His work has since been showcased on CNN at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, plays collected by Denzel Washington, Halle Berry, Don Cheadle, Blair Underwood, among others. Also important to note, Alvin is the restaurant owner of Alvin and Friends, selected 5 times as Best of Westchester by Westchester Magazine. In 1992, Clayton held his first solo show at the Lee Art Gallery in Soho, and he continues to show today. He currently has a beautiful exhibition entitled Reflection of Time Through the Eyes of a Caribbean American Artist on view at the Southampton African American Museum now through November 17th. So I encourage everyone to go take a look at that exhibition as well. So Francine Hsu Davis was born and raised in Queens, New York. As a commuter most of her young adult life, she was equally captivated by the graffiti alongside the NYC subway line as she was the Greek-Roman wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Having attended programs at Cooper Union and FIT High School, the continuous pull towards art led Francine to take elective studio art and art history courses while earning her undergraduate degree at Barnard. She continued her education at the Yale School of Architecture, earning a Master's of Architecture professional degree. In summer of 2014, her interest in urbanism and art led her to put her successful architectural career on hold in New York City and moved her family to Asia to experience new culture and to learn Mandarin. There, she drew and painted daily, creating her 100 Days of Taipei project before moving to San Francisco and other spaces to continue her artistic practice. Now, Francine works primarily in oil, but is known to experiment with watercolor, acrylics, and anything that she can draw with, including eyeliner. She has exhibited nationally and was awarded a residency recently at the Vermont Studio Center. In 2018, she moved back to her hometown of New York City and now paints out of the studio in the historic Alexander Carpet Mills building, Yoho Art Studios in Yonkers, New York. And I also encourage everyone to visit Yoho, especially during our open studios. Several of the contemporary artists on view also work at Yoho, so it's a really great place to find artists in the community. So now I'm just going to take a seat and I'm going to pass it on, and I'll start by asking Alvin a couple questions, then Francine, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for the audience as well. So Alvin, I'll just start with kind of a broad question. As I alluded to in your biography, France is a very important kind of place in your artistic journey, and so I would just love to hear a little bit more about kind of your experience traveling to France for the first time, how you felt that it's continued to influence your art, anything and everything about the place.
Thank you, and thank everybody for coming out today. And I'm honored to be a part of this show, Francine and all these amazing artists. But my journey in France, I was fortunate enough I had a contract with the Wilhelmina Modeling Agency, and one of my very first jobs in Europe actually was in Italy, and I went to Italy and I did the job. And then right after, while I was there, I got a booking to go to France and Paris. And I went over there, and when I landed, the scenery and the Paris was just the most amazing city to me. And I said, if I can take the Italians and put them in France, it would be the most incredible, incredible space. But anyways, no, I went to Musée d'Orsay and I fell in love with Matisse's work. One of the first pieces that I saw was the Matisse dance. And I have a version that I did of that painting that, even though it was all Caucasian dancers in a circle, when I looked at it, I saw people of different ethnicities. And so my painting is the Matisse dance with people of different ethnicities in it. I just loved everything about Matisse. I think the colors spoke to me because I came from the Caribbean, from Trinidad. And my grandmother's house, the patterns on Matisse's paintings were the patterns that I grew up with in my house. And I always drew as a child, but coming from Caribbean parentage, you can't tell them that you want to be an artist. They'll tell you go get a job. So I kept that in. But Matisse's work just spoke to me. And so like for 6 months, I just copied his paintings, teaching myself how to paint. And then I said, I want to paint people of color in this same realm. And I just branched off into doing my own art. And I would go to the south of France, and I saw the beautiful gardens there and just the intimate setting. And that's always been a part of all of my work. I'm not afraid of color. I paint it. I've learned quite a few things about Matisse, because even though Matisse's work has a lot of bold colors everywhere, there's still a common effect about his work. And I think what I learned from studying his work is the placement of the color. So even though if there's a yellow up here, he'd probably have a yellow down here, so your eyes doesn't just go to one space. It sees the whole complete painting, which gives you that common effect. So I try to do that in my work. And so, you know, with all the things, my painting for me is a bit of escapism. I love to look things through a window. So when Karina was talking about this painting and being a doorway, my paintings for me is like an escapism as well. And with all the things that's going on today in this world, I constantly go back into spaces that made me happy and warm, and this is what that painting came from. So I hope that gave a little bit of a overview.
No, and that was something that really drew me to this work, was sort of the use of bright colors that I've seen kind of throughout a lot of your paintings, and also the kind of composition of this table at the front, almost as if you're going to take a seat there. But there's also this kind of mysterious figure in the back. And so I guess, to me, this painting really feels like it's telling a story. Right. And it's really rare to hear the artist tell you that story. Right. And so, you know, can you walk us through a little bit about what's happening?
So first of all, the table, I intentionally placed it up front because it's an invitation for people to come and sit around this table. And the bowl and the table, the red bowl with the fish insignia, which signifies peace. So it's called basically like the table of peace. And just with everything that we're dealing with today, I just wanted people to kind of like take that moment and be in this better space, okay? And what I try to do is like, there's life all around us, right? Regardless of what we have. But what I try to do in my paintings is I try to reach out to people's humanity. And I think when you have a situation where, you know, I intentionally put that individual in this painting with their back to the audience, because I didn't want it to be about race or anything. I wanted to be people to reach out and say, you know what, I could identify with that situation. I know what's going on, I see what's going on there. And so that's the whole thing. It's like, it's just coming to our common humanity. It doesn't have to be anything except that this is a situation, this is a space that's beautiful, and you want to be transformed to that space. So that's what I try to do with the work.
And you mentioned this as well when you were talking a little bit about your kind of biography. Matisse is obviously a huge influence, but also kind of your grandmother's gardens in Trinidad as well. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about kind of blending these different traditions, these different spaces in your art.
So, well, to start with the Matisse being important in my life, my daughter's name is Matisse, one of my daughters. You think I like him a lot? No, so my grandmother, like in our house, in the Caribbean, my grandmother had a beautiful garden. I just remember like being in the summertime, I left Trinidad many years ago, but I always remember all of her plants that she had and all the butterflies that were in our garden when I was growing up. And for me, that's like, being an immigrant in this country, sometimes you go through like these periods where life is not always easy and you need that escape. And so for me, in a lot of my paintings, I paint a lot of gardens and flowers and different things like that. And that's my escapism, and that is my comfortable space that I go to. And I think every piece of my art is like, I'm being true to myself and what really speaks to me. And at the same time though, being a restaurateur and dealing with the public, my whole being is to make people feel comfortable and welcome. And I think that these, when I do these paintings, that invitation is to invite everyone and to have everyone be able to identify with what I'm trying to say and have them have a space where they're very comfortable and take them to a better place, because that's kind of innate in my personality. So I think it comes through. If you're being true to your art and what you do, I think that comes through in your art, and people, that's what they relate to in the authenticity of what you've put out.
Definitely. And I have to say, Alvin and I first met because I got a tip that there was a restaurant in Rochelle that had amazing art on the walls. And so I went, I kind of snuck in and looked around, and they were like, who's laundering here? And Alvin and I met, we talked, the rest is history. But there really is that sense of sort of warmth and all of these works kind of coming together. And I'm going to return back to Alvin in a second, but I also want to chat with Francine a little bit. Again, I think hopefully in hearing us talk, there's a lot already that we can see that your work shares. It's also quite different, right, in terms of the kind of what you have on the wall itself. Your work in this particular piece is very much drawn from your experience, as I mentioned already, in Taiwan. And so could you also share with us kind of your story and how your time in Taiwan, what drew you there, how it continues to shape your art, and in particular this piece?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So similarly to Alvin, I come from immigrant parents, and the choices were limited in what they were sort of acceptable careers, doctor or lawyer. Anything else, you're a black sheep. So I became an architect. I couldn't tell my parents I wanted to be a graffiti artist. And growing up in Queens and seeing 5 Points and seeing like beautiful art on the street every single day, commuting. And then my father would always take me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He would pretend our car was broken down, leave it on Fifth Avenue, and we'd run in and go see the Greek and Roman wing. And so that always stuck with me, and I always wanted to be an artist, but again, with immigrant parents, it was not in the cards. And so also growing up, I spent a lot of time, actually more in France than anywhere else, because my parents came to the US and were like, we're Americans now, don't worry about learning Chinese, you don't have to really know about the culture. Even though Chinese was my first speaking language at home, it was not really emphasized. So I had actually spent more time in Paris and in France before I ever moved to Taiwan. And I did a whole summer at the Chateau of Fontainebleau with the École des Beaux-Arts doing architecture and art. And then in 2014, we had moved to Jersey for a couple years, and I could not stand being in Jersey, coming from New York. And so my solution was, let's quit our jobs, sell our car, and move everyone to Taiwan. So we immersed fully in Chinese school. My husband and I learned Chinese. The girls went to Chinese school. And when I got there, it was shocking because everyone was like, well, look at you. You must be able to speak Chinese, read Chinese. And when I couldn't read or write, they were like, that's weird. Like, why are you illiterate? And so even like my kids being enrolled in school, I couldn't even write their Chinese names. Like my dad named them, but I did not know how to write it. And what really struck me when I was in Taiwan, so I went out every day for 100 days. I drew Taiwan. I would bike around and I would take photographs, I would sketch it, and then that has led to inspiration for years and years. So I brought all that inspiration home, but this particular painting was because of the rote memorization that is pushed in Taiwan. Like when you learn how to read and write, you write it 1,000 times. Like you write it over and over and over again. So here was basically me figuring out how to write my kids' Chinese names, and I did it 300 times. And that, along with the daily sort of immersion into the culture and the architecture, I would ride around the city, I would find a beautiful piece of architecture, and I would just sit there and draw. And that really allowed me to meet people in the community and learn more about the culture, because they were fascinated by why I was drawing these buildings. They're like, that's not appealing. And I'm like, well, being an architect, being someone who grew up in New York, who really loves urbanism, being immersed in the city was really a big part of my experience. So that's sort of, this painting was a combination of like the rote memorization, figuring out culturally like how to be Taiwanese, and then also experiencing it for the first time as a New Yorker.
That's actually so interesting to also learn about kind of the influence of Bronxville region as well, because with the Will painting, Will actually did a lot of his training with the Barbizon School, which was kind of a group of French painters in that area. And so it is kind of wonderful to hear how these kind of artistic colonies and spaces kind of keep kind of bringing in artists across time. But then in this particular piece, I also wanted to kind of ask you not only about the sort of use of Chinese scripts, which you've spoken about, but also the kind of color red, right? Mm-hmm. I think that being in this space, we might think of it as a landscape painting because there are kind of mountains in the background and buildings, but you also have kind of this bright color that is not, what we would naturally associate with the earth. So can you tell us a little bit about that choice?
Yeah, so you'll learn a little secret about my process. I once worked with an architect, and he had an amazing renderer, and they would do these beautiful watercolors, and his trick was always wash your paper with a really bright yellow, this particular yellow. He would always start a painting by washing the entire paper with that, and then he would start the painting. And so whatever building was painted would kind of glow. And so through this series, I did a whole series about memory, and every painting I would wash it with a very bright color underneath, and then I would layer on top of it. So usually it was yellow. This particular one I started with red, but I've always kind of shied away from red and gold because of its association with being like Chinese. And I think because growing up, I was so, like, assimilation was such a big, theme that I was like, oh, I'm born here, like I'm not a foreigner. But as I got older, I realized like it's a huge part of me being from both cultures. And so that was sort of the choice of the underpainting. And that was the idea for the base layer that I was building on top of.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned this idea of this being part of a series from memory. And so this piece is called Memories 4, and it's part of a larger series of works based on kind of memories of your time abroad. Mm-hmm. And so I was wondering if you could share more about kind of the stakes of kind of painting from the point of view of memory, right? What does it mean to kind of paint something that you remember rather than something that you're presently experiencing? And now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually a large distinction from a lot of the paintings on view, which are painted on plein air, outdoors, which is very much to emphasize that moment of kind of immediately taking in a space and translating that out. And so what does that distance of memory kind of do for your work?
Well, I've always been fascinated by memory because we've had some like family members with memory loss, and I've always was fascinated like why we remember certain things and why we don't, and why some people remember things from their childhood. I'll hear my parents talk about things that happened when they were 5, and I can't remember what happened last week. I'm like, how is it that certain things, and our memory is so fascinating. Sometimes it's like a beautiful blessing to remember everything, and other times it really fails us. So this particular series, there were sort of 4 styles of memory. Sometimes our memory is very organized, sometimes it's very fragmented, sometimes it's very blurry, sometimes it's, just fragments. So I used different techniques in this series. One, I had cut up some photographs and sort of rearranged and collaged them and then painted it. A lot of these were based on the fact that I had experienced something and I'd sketched in person. So like, I remember it because my hand to the piece of paper, being in the space, like that helps you remember in a certain way. And then also photographs, while they are a replication of the space, but your experience of it is very different. So I may remember this building being blue, but the photograph is showing it was actually a gray building, but my experience kind of is what translates it into my painting.
Alvin, I'm curious. Francine just walked us a little bit of your process. What is kind of your process when you're kind of approaching? Do you paint outdoors or in the studio?
I'm actually mostly in my studio, but before I start, I see the complete painting, and then I go to the canvas, and then it's almost like having all the puzzle pieces and then just putting them in. And then I would have the basic painting would be there, and then I would step back, and then I would look and see space, if that particular space needs something. So a lot of the paintings that I do, they're from my head. I may get an idea from something that gives the basis of what it is, but I also have a kind of a photographic memory. I see paintings or photographs that kind of inspires me, and I can put it away in my mental, and when the right moment comes up for using that particular piece of information that I have, I'm able to pull it up. Or I could look at a magazine like 15 years ago and had an idea for something, a color or something that kind of spoke to me, and I would be like, this painting, somewhere in my brain, it's saying that color, you have to use it, but you'll have to use it at the right time for the right thing. And then once I'm doing that painting, I can recall and I can actually go back and remember where that particular image was, whatever, and I would put it into my painting. So that's been my process in painting.
That's so interesting. I think that when you think about ideas of travel and movement and return, memory is also a big component of it, because you kind of tend to return right to the places that hold significance in your life and in your memory. And when I was curating this exhibition, that kind of constantly emerged throughout the space of artists returning and coming back to specific communities or creating their own, in Lawrence Park, for example, and then also abroad. And so I wanted to kind of conclude our conversation with kind of this idea of community and belonging, which is in some ways oftentimes brought up as a counterpoint to immigration and migration. And so I wondered if you could just reflect a little bit on how terms like kind of belonging inform your own work or kind of your life in general. We've talked a little bit about Alvin and Friends, the restaurant as a space of gathering people. I know Francine also works in design, interior design, and so how those terms kind of infuse your kind of experience in general.
Yeah, I think in terms of community, everything I do, like, I want to support artists and creators and people who make things. So whether, if I'm picking a certain vendor or researching for a project, I always love to find people who are making things with their hands, or creating, an amazing plaster artist who also does some metal, who also happens to be a muralist, so I'm always fascinated by supporting these people. And I mentioned to Karintha, I was doing a photo shoot yesterday for a project that I designed, and like just talking to the stylist and like figuring out their background, and like the photographer, and that he was a pianist at one point, like people who, are kind of immersed in the arts in various forms. That's the community that I feel like I'm always gravitated toward.
For me, the community is really important in everything that I do, because once I first of all, they're included in my paintings. I paint at my restaurant. We have live jazz, and that really speaks to me. I think it adds to the energy of my space. The paintings on the wall, they're there so that the community can enjoy it. And when I paint, I've painted some of the jazz musicians that have played at the restaurant. And my whole being is like, how do we kind of give back what we get from them? And how do that moment that makes me feel wonderful, whatever, I want to share that with the community as well. And I think that's what those paintings do. And, you know, I observe the questions that I ask myself when I'm painting also is very community oriented. It's like, why am I painting this? What am I trying to say? Why is it even important? And how can I relate it where even if I have a difference of opinion, that I can engage the community so that they're open to be able to have their discussion on it as well. So for me, the whole thing about art is really kind of opening it up so that there's a conversation. I try not to make anybody wrong. When I have any conversation, I tell people I'm always open to the fact that I could be wrong, because whatever I'm bringing into the conversation, I got it from somewhere. And there might have been a piece of information that somebody else is bringing now to the conversation that I may not have considered that can probably get me to change my mind or my view. And so when I do my paintings, it's not about, I may have my opinion on it, but there's always that opening for conversation so that everybody kind of is inclusive in what I do.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful way of framing it, as well as with Francine, your idea of making sure that everyone is kind of included in the creation of these spaces is also its own community as well. And I will say that, you know, one element of this exhibition that I really enjoyed is that, like I mentioned, I worked with class of Sarah Lawrence students, mainly art history concentrators, and part of the idea here was that I worked with them to do historical research into one of the Bronxville artists, and then interview one of the contemporary artists, and then write kind of interpretive labels that we call another look labels. So you'll see those scattered throughout the space. They're the larger ones. There's one right here, and sort of in between the two. And it was really an exercise for the students in understanding how putting these works together kind of challenges us to look at each of them anew, but also to recognize the kind of exciting similarities that happen when we're in sort of unchanging landscapes as well. And so it was really an exhibition that was full of a lot of different conversations, and not only between historical contemporary artists, but also between kind of emerging curators as well. The students really love the opportunity to engage with these works. And so for now, I'll open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions for our artists.
I'm so fascinated by this piece. When I first saw it, I had a question. So all of that's writing, that's you learning, practicing. Mm-hmm. So is it all, obviously different things, but could you tell us what it says?
So one thing I've been fascinated with is Chinese calligraphy, because my dad is an amazing artist, and he could, you know, in 2 strokes create this beautiful horse. And so when we were in Taiwan, I found this teacher, and I learned a little bit, very short amount of time. But what I was fascinated with was a different way of thinking, where like the Western thinking, it's very free. You kind of like, you decide you're an artist and you can make it happen. Whereas I feel like in Chinese calligraphy, like it's so repetitive. Like I would draw a bamboo and he's like, no, do it again. It's like 100 times later, I'm like, it's still, to me, it looks like a bamboo, but he's like, not even close. So that's where, like, with the Chinese writing, it's actually my kids' names. So you'll see repeated, like there's like usually 3 names, their last name in there. So you'll see it repeated quite a bit. So that's actually one and that's another. And I did that over and over again. And then I basically said I am, and that's my name. But it took me a really long time. When I first got there, I was like, how do I write my own name? Like I remember I did it when I was 10, but I don't know. So it was a lot of practicing, and also I don't have a handwriting in Chinese. Like I see people write it and I'm like, I don't know if I look like I'm writing like a 3-year-old or like a 50-year-old. I don't know. Like so it was just a lot of practice.
Right, or just...
So usually yes, but I did it from right to left. Yeah.
architecture, which
Yes.
is kind of the notebook paper. I too had to learn how to very basic lines. So I also did the my name is.
Yeah.
And so it's on a grid-like paper. So the second I saw this when I was visiting Yoho, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this notebook paper in so long. But immediately struck me.
The architect in me would really love making very orthogonal lines.
Can I ask you, where's that restaurant we were talking about?
We're all headed there now.
So the restaurant is in New Rochelle. It's right across from the New Rochelle Public Library. We've been open now for 15 years. And actually, there's an update. We've actually won the Best of Westchester at least for 13 of the 15 years we've been open. We actually, yeah, so it's called Alvin and Friends. And it's Caribbean and Southern influence fine dining, and it's we have live jazz on Fridays and Saturdays, and a jazz brunch every Sunday from 11:30 to 3:30. Yeah. So come out, and I'm there all the time unless I'm here.
Unless you're eating.
Exactly. Well, actually, that's the thing. I mean, I pulled myself away from painting to go to the restaurant, and I paint on my day off. And I leave the restaurants at night, and I go into my studio, and I paint till 2, 3 in the morning. And so I paint almost every day. So that's my release and my passion. And, you know.
And is the restaurant got all your paintings?
Yes. And this is my wife and my daughter here, and they endure me.
Hi, Alvin. I like what you said about a painting starting a conversation, because I'm a docent here at the Hudson Valley, and that's how we show and share art. We get a conversation going. What do you see? What more can you find? And everybody has a different interpretation, and it broadens all of our perspective.
No, absolutely. I mean, so I have a show right now that just opened on Saturday at the Southampton African American Museum. And there's some political pieces in the show, but I can come out and just be very partisan with my view, but I don't think that moves the conversation ahead. Because if you feel that you're right in your stance, why have a conversation with anybody else? Because you're not going to go anywhere. So what I do with my painting is like, okay, what is the opening that shows somebody, you know what, this is my opinion, but it's not 100%, and you have space for your conversation as well. And so that's really important to me when I do any pieces. One of the pieces in the show, it's called SCOTUS. It's called the Shameless Court of the United States. And initially when I did the painting, it's if all the Supreme Court justices I had, initially I had with all the decisions being made right now, with the leading court, it was like decisions that most Americans were not in favor of. And so I had them in shame for some of the decisions they made. And then after I said, you know what, it looked really partisan. So then I researched and I said, okay, which Supreme Court justices have violations against them or ethic violations, to try and be fair? Because, the question that you always hear, if you say something about your political guy or whatever, there's always that question, well, what about? And I was like, before that question came about, I wanted to research it. So I researched, and then I found out that 2 of the other justices had ethic violations as well. And I went back and I actually put everybody that had any ethic violation, and it turned out there was only one person without ethic violation, that was Elena Kagan. And so in the painting, she's the only person that's just there sitting, but everybody, but at least if somebody is looking at it, I can be honest in the conversation and say, this is the reason that this is here, and I didn't exclude anyone, and so they can give me more validation for what I want to say as an artist.
Question for both artists, actually. I'm curious if there are points in time in
You want to go first?
Sure. I used to avoid doing that, and just because I like it, like for me again, it's almost like capturing a moment in time, so that memory wants to stay. But that has evolved, and more recently I did start like going back. I might just paint over something completely, just start from scratch, like don't like it anymore, move on. Or if something feels, it's less so about finishing, it's usually a fresh start if I go back to a canvas. Yeah.
I've actually the same approach. For the longest while, I never touched it. It was like, that's finished or whatever. And now I think in the last 2 years, I think my work has really evolved to a place where I'm really comfortable with it. And so there's some pieces that had certain statements that I wanted to make. And I just feel now with my technique and different things that I've actually gone back and revisited it. But there's some also where I've actually totally just painted over it and covered it up. Yeah, so, and somebody just told me recently, you need to leave some of those so we can see your growth. So some of them I'm leaving alone, but yeah.
I also will just put one of the artists in the audience on the spot right now. We have Jamie K. McKenzie. If you just want to put your hand up, she's the brilliant artist behind Reviving Ophelia, so I won't put you fully on the spot. But I know that in your work, also you kind of create these pieces over years, and you really think about kind of washing away and putting together different layers of paint.
Yeah, just hearing you guys say that, so many of my paintings have so many paintings beneath them. So sometimes you can hold them up to the window and see the painting.
Wow.
That's a little tip I give people. Just hold it to them. But yeah, I love everything you guys are saying. So nice
thank
to
you.
hear you talk. And just about memory, about layers, about so much. So, yeah, very different process in a way. In that my painting teacher in high school taught me to use red on my canvas, and I rebelled against it. And it became this thing I felt like I had to stick with. But it's a really wonderful trick, really. It does make it meaningful.
Well, I love your piece too. I really do.
And
It has a very spiritual
Thank you.
element to it.
So you learn so much talking with artists about their processes and a lot of kind of the sense of an underlayer and underglaze and ceramics we did that kind of shows up in different art forms that I think really gets to this thought of